So, hello everybody again. Welcome to this fourth session of the week of presentations that we've been having. We are delighted to continue all these discussions with you and to bring you two more talks for today that I'm very sure you're gonna enjoy. So for the people that are joining for the first time, I wanted to give you a little context. You are joining now the cycle of webinars that we have prepared called Multidisciplinary Approaches to Rhythm and Bodily Practices. And this is an idea that we've been having on the making along with Francisco Vergara, who is also joining us today. He belongs to the Department of Anthropology at UCL, University College of London. And along with several of my classmates in Corumundus Cohort 7, Maria Jose Bejarano, Subhashini Goda, and Nayara Rota Asuncion, we have been putting together this event, which I'm sure you're gonna enjoy. So just a couple of technical observations. Please make sure that your microphone is muted, only for this first section of the presentation, because afterwards we're gonna go through a questions and answers section where you will be free to throw and ask any comment or observation that you feel like. For that, please make sure that you are using the option that is available, the raise your hand option, which you're gonna find if you press the button participant here in Zoom. And at the very bottom of the list of all the people that is connected, you should be able to find that button. But if you don't, you can also write your question in the comments section so that I or Francisco will be reading it out loud for our speakers today. Final important observation is that this session is being recorded from the beginning. So please, if you prefer to not be recorded, you can always not only mute your microphone, but also you can cancel your camera. So that is an option that you can do by yourself right next to your name. I think that is pretty much it when it comes to technical observations. But now I want to give a big welcome to Benedikte Wallace and also Maria Jose Bejarano, who are the two speakers that we are going to be having for today. And we're going to have the same structure. First, we're going to have Benedikte, then we're going to have a little Q&A section. Then we're going to go for Maria Jose's presentation, and then again for a Q&A session that it's going to be the closure of the whole day. And so I want to say a little introduction for Benedikte, which is going to be the first speaker of today. And Benedikte Wallace is a Doctoral Research Fellow at the RITMO Centre for Interdisciplinary Studies of Rhythm, Time and Motion at the University of Oslo. With a background in music recording and a master's degree in informatics, her academic interests lie in the cross-section between art and science. Her current research is centered on sound motion mappings with 3D motion capture, generative machine learning, and computational creativity. So welcome, Benedikte. Thank you so much for joining us today. She's going to be sharing with us the presentation called How Do We Teach an Artificial Intelligence to Dance, and Why Should We? So very happy to have you. I'm gonna proceed to mute myself and also to make you the host of this presentation so that you can share any material that you have prepared for us. Thank you, Benny.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jorge. Then let's see. Hi, everyone, by the way. I'll see if I can get this screen sharing to work. I'll be sharing some videos with you as well, so I need to be able to, for you to hear me.
And just a little comment, Benny, if you see that there's anybody in the waiting room, can I please ask you to admit them, just in case there's somebody still trying to join your talk?
I will try to keep that in mind. I admitted someone now, so I haven't done that before, so.
Don't worry. I don't want to distract you. Please go ahead.
Seems like that went well. Okay, so now I am assuming you guys can see my presentation and not my notes. Good. Yeah, this is an issue. Okay, great. When we get to the audio and video part, we will have to see. Hopefully that works fine. Otherwise, I'll make some changes. So, okay, let me just move all your beautiful faces to somewhere I can see them. Good. Okay, so yes, hi everyone. My name is Benedikte, and I've been invited to talk to you guys about my work, which involves generating movement using machine learning or artificial intelligence. And I'm very grateful, I should say, first off, and a little nervous for the opportunity to present some of my thoughts. But I hope you find it interesting. And I'm very happy to have this opportunity to also learn from all of you. So I'd like to start this off by just saying something about the place where I work. Let's see. So I'm a PhD student at the RITMO Centre for Interdisciplinary Studies in Rhythm, Time, and Motion. And one of RITMO's main research goals is to expand our understanding of rhythm as a fundamental property of human life. And this is, of course, no small task. And as such, we at RITMO believe that these kinds of questions can't necessarily be solved within a single research discipline or direction. But will require us to collaborate across various disciplines. And so RITMO is an interdisciplinary center with researchers from a lot of different fields, but predominantly it combines people from 3 faculties at the University of Oslo, which then work together in different constellations on a range of questions related to rhythm, time, and motion. So these 3 different directions are musicology, we have people from psychology, and then informatics, which is the group that I belong to, informatics and computer science. And so at RITMO, I work within a subgroup, which we call interaction and robotics, where people research topics related to multidimensional mappings from sensors to musical parameters, and in investigating aspects of rhythm and motion through robotics and technology. And what this basically means is that we build a lot of weird stuff and have a lot of fun, basically. So my focus in particularly lies with what sort of things we can do with machine learning or AI and creative data. So during my master's, I worked on AI and music generation, and currently my focus is on movement, and more specifically on dance. Now, the reason that I'm so interested in AI and art is that it poses a lot of very interesting questions, I think. Now, I don't know if there are people here with a lot of experience with artificial intelligence or not. So I'll stick to sort of the core concepts. If you do know a bit about AI already, then you might find these descriptions a bit simplified, but I hope you can then just bear with me. So most AI tasks that we see today can be split into 2 general goals. We have classification on one hand, and then we have prediction on the other. So in classification tasks, we want our AI to look at some data and give it a label. So like here, we might do this for images, right? Image recognition. So we might say, okay, this is obviously a dog to the left. Middle one is a cat, label it as a cat. Last one is the best thing, label it some way. So that's classic, just classification task. Look at some data, give it a label. And the other is prediction. So in prediction tasks, we want our AI to look at the data and predict what comes next. So we're not trying to classify something, but rather to complete a sequence. And this is the kind of AI that I use most because we can use it to generate new data, which is called generative AI. So both these types of tasks, classification and prediction, usually use what we call supervised learning. And this just means that we have some data that we want the model to learn something from, and we also already know the correct answer. So we can then use the correct answer to supervise the model while it's learning, or to check that it is indeed learning what we want it to. So we train AI models by sending a lot of data through a neural network, an artificial neural network, and making the model give us an estimate about the correct mapping between some data and these true values, the correct answers that we have. And the model learns by then calculating how far removed the estimate is from the actual true answer. So we have something like this. So we have some data, it is sent through the model. This is what we call sort of the training step, and the model gives us some estimate. So in my case, maybe a body pose. And then I have the actual body pose, the actual true value. And so we compare these two, and that should give us some error. We can calculate some error, like how far off was the model estimate to the truth. And then this error is used to sort of send back through the network, which is where the actual learning happens. But this implies that we need some way to measure how wrong or how right the model's estimates were. And this brings me to the concept of using AI to generate creative and expressive data. Say we want an AI to predict the next note in a note sequence in order to generate a melody. So what would the next note be? There may be some notes that we prefer for some reason, but it's hard to say which note is the right note. And this also goes for movement, or indeed any creative data. And so if we no longer hold this correct answer, how can we then, how can the model know how well it's doing and learn to improve its estimates over time? So this is one of the challenges that we face when working with supervised learning and creative data. So I'll come back to these problems at a later point when we look a bit more closely at some of the challenges that arise when working specifically with movement. But first, I'd like to sort of jump in and just start addressing some whys. So why would we even want an AI to be able to generate artistic and creative data? Is it my goal to replace all creatives with super fast and cheap machines? Well, the short answer is no. Of course, that's not my goal. But there are a couple of cool things that we can do with this. So a possible use case for these kind of creative AI, if we call them that, is to use them as creative tools. So a sort of a suggestion giver to be used by artists to aid in the creative process. So this is quite common actually, both when it comes to visual art and especially music. It's quite common to use AI tools in music making. But for movement, we're not really there quite yet. But we could imagine that a model that can generate movement might, for example, be used by a choreographer or someone else to sort of import their own movements and then have the model generate a continuation or maybe several variations on the movements you performed, which might then give you some new ideas. Another quite recent development is that we know more and more about how important this will be in human-robot interaction. So I don't think I need to convince anyone here that human movement conveys a lot of information to other humans about our emotional state, about our intentions, and so on. So being able to replicate and produce expressive gestures will be a very important step in facilitating human-robot interactions as robots become more integrated into our lives. But what is perhaps the most interesting to me personally is the potential to use creative models like this to better understand our own creative processes. So what can computational creativity potentially teach us about ourselves? What kinds of artificial neural networks are required to produce a creative output? What things do these models actually learn? Because what the model learns can sometimes tell us a lot about the data we've used to train the model. So we often refer to this as a sort of analysis by synthesis, wherein the generated work can be analyzed to tell us more about the data source that was used. So let me talk a little more concretely about my current work in movement generating models. So in order to train my AI model, I need to start collecting some examples of dance to use as training data. So in the fall of last year, I began my data collection process. So what I did was that I invited dancers to come into our motion capture lab, and I recorded full body motion capture of them doing short solo improvisations. So one person in the room improvising to a set of musical stimuli. So then with each of these recordings, they're 1 minute each. So I slice them up into smaller sequences of about 10 seconds. And then these 10-second movement sequences become the examples I use to train the model. The true values that I use are then just the position of the body in the following frame. So that's what I use to be my true values, which I can compare then to what the model estimates and then calculate some difference between what it gives me and what was actually performed, what was actually the next frame. So the type of AI model that I use consists of artificial neurons that we call LSTMs, or long short-term memory cells, which are a type of recurrent neural network. And this kind of model is quite common to use when you are dealing with time series data and prediction, because as the name implies, these types of networks retain a sort of short-term memory, which allows it to base its estimate not only on the immediately preceding example, but the whole sequence of movement. So it sort of holds this whole sequence in its artificial brain and then suggests the next pose. Because if it just looks at like the millisecond before, it doesn't really capture a lot of what is happening and the overall movement sequence. So these are the models that I'm using right now. So then when my model is done training, which is to say when it's no longer able to improve on these estimates, then I can feed the model a movement sequence and I can have it generate new movements as a continuation of that sequence. So I thought I'd show you some of the strange things that my model generates. But first, I wanted to take a closer look at the data collection process. So I recorded 30 dancers. They have varying degrees of dance experience. So some had been dancing and teaching for over a decade, while others had really just been dancing for around a year. But for me, the most important thing was to get participants that felt comfortable with improvisation, particularly to music that they had never heard before. So I wanted people to come into the motion capture lab, hear some music, and immediately start moving their bodies. Other than that, I didn't specify that I wanted them to have done that much training or within a specific dance style or anything like that. So just that they were comfortable in improvising. So most of the participants had experience from jazz and from modern dance. Some had ballet experience. There were also a few that had experience with styles like whacking. So there was a little bit of a mix from the participants. So I used 6 different musical excerpts, most of which I had created myself together with another musician. And our goal was to create music which would have different amounts of pulse clarity, and that would be relatively easy to move to. So neither me or my musician friend are dancers ourselves, so we had to rely on sort of the feedback we got from the dancers, if this was true, that the music was relatively easy to improvise to or move to. And mostly this feedback was good, but it was definitely clear that there were each dancer had at least one of the songs that they sort of struggled a little bit with, which they found harder to improvise to than the others, which was also kind of interesting to see. So each dancer performed 3 repetitions of each of the 6 songs. So in total, I have 540 1-minute improvisations to use as my data set to train my model. And here in this picture, you can see one of my dancers in a mocap suit. Possibly, if any of you have been in these mocap suits, you'll know that it's not the most breathable material. So it got quite hot and sweaty in there, but they did a really good job. So before we look at what the model actually learned from these examples, I'd like to show you one of the recordings. So just a recording of one of the dancers. So let's see, now we will find out if you guys can hear anything. So Jorge, I can see you on my screen, so please just give me a thumbs up if you can hear sound and if it's loud enough. If not, just give me one of these. Okay, here goes. Great. So you could hear, was it lagging or did it flow okay? I need some thumbs up. Great. Okay, I'm so happy. Good. Because I have a couple more I want to show you, so I'm glad that it's not too glitchy. So this was performed by a ballet dancer, an experienced ballet dancer. And as you can see, the dancers had to stay within quite a small area in the room so that the motion capture cameras surrounding them would have the best possible chance of getting the recordings as accurately as possible. And as I'm sure many of you can imagine, staying within this small area it poses some challenges for the dancers to sort of contain their movement within quite a small space. And it was definitely a bigger challenge for some dancers than others. Some really struggled with this little space. But yeah, again, they were really good at being patient and sort of aware and not too aware that there were like 14 cameras filming them constantly. So I think it turned out pretty good. Okay, so I'm just going to skip because I think I made a backup video. There we go. Yes. And then probably this will start. Yes. There we go. Okay. So now that you've seen what my data looks like, let's see what the model was able to generate when I fed this data through my model. So I began training my model on just a subset of these recordings that I did. So only with a few of the dancers, not all 30. Just to see what kind of movements the model would learn. So the point line animations that you can see here, they're a bit simpler than in the last video. This is just because I have reduced the markers down to a set of 22 joint markers, just to simplify it a little bit for the artificial intelligence model. So that originally people were wearing 43 markers on their bodies, but here it's just simplified down to 22 to give an idea of certain joints on the body. So this first video shows what the model was generating at sort of the earliest stages of training. And it's pretty crazy. It mostly shakes a lot. But I still think it's quite sweet in a way, because it's like it's sort of figuring out that hands and feet move a lot, but then it isn't able to reel that in. So it maybe takes that concept a bit far. So I'm going to play it for you now. Slow down, grip yourself, don't go diving, yeah. Slow down, grip yourself, don't go diving, yeah. Yeah, so it was that, just forever and ever and ever and ever. Yeah. So I wasn't very pleased, but I have a place in my heart for this model that just does this, even though it's a little simple. So just going to skip these again. Here we go. So yeah, the model did this for a long time. Like I was training and it just kept doing this spinny arm, spinny foot thing, and I was starting to get a bit worried. But then one day, after a lot more training, something changed, and the model started learning something about shape, I think, and it started generating things that sort of had a more of a sway to them. So this next video is just very short, but after watching the model just generate this sort of shaking thing for weeks and weeks, when I saw this, I got very excited. So I'll just show you what it does. So this might just be me going slowly insane to be so happy about seeing this, but there was something about it seemed to be bending forwards. I don't know. It was definitely something different was happening, which made me very happy. So from sort of this point, this short video, it learned a bit more about just the shape of the human body. And it still today occasionally breaks the rules of what is physically possible for our bodies to do. But I also think it does that in like kind of interesting ways. I don't know, I'll leave that up to you. So the next thing, oh yeah, I need to skip through these extra videos, sorry. There we go. So I ended up combining several more videos generated by the model, sort of just for fun, just to showcase some of the different stages that the model was going through while learning. So the video I'm going to show you now shows how the model goes from sort of chaos to structure and then briefly back to chaos as it learns. This video is a bit longer, but I hope you enjoy it. Oh yeah, and as I mentioned, the model still hasn't completely captured what the human body can and cannot do. So as an example, please notice how the figure begins to sort of extend its right arm, and then it just keeps extending and extending and extending until the arm is practically as long as its body. And then it retracts it down to a normal size again. And this ended up being a move that the model repeated several times and sort of kept wanting to do, if I can put it that way. So yeah, watch out for that. Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's a little collage of the model's development. So yeah, I'm going to skip this again. So, okay. So now I had begun to get a model that was able to generate something potentially interesting, some interesting movements. And so now going forwards, as I attempt to improve my model's ability to generate sort of new, hopefully some improvements, I was sort of struck by the question then, okay, how do I compare the different things that the model is doing? How do I measure its success? So one of the things that I'm very passionate about is involving actual humans in this process. People who have expertise in movement, dance, and improvisation, and basically asking them to evaluate the results. And in a way, this happens surprisingly seldomly with creative data generated by AI. Very often, I find that we as developers, as researchers, build a model that produces something and we say, oh, this looks cool. And then we just sort of leave it at that. But I do believe it's important to dig a little deeper and try to sort of, I guess, understand a bit more about what is happening, particularly if we intend to use these models as creative tools, then we should involve the people who this tool is meant for. So I think that's an interesting way of going forwards. Another way I would like to evaluate this generated data is using more quantitative measures. One option I've been looking into for this is the concept of movement similarity. So if the model is able to produce things that are similar to the data that I use to train it, then this could be a good indication that the model has indeed learned some of the underlying movement languages of the dancers. Of course, this is unfortunately not a trivial task. So deciding if two movements are similar or not is, firstly, it's very context dependent. So for some applications, like for example, gesture recognition, some metrics like just the Euclidean distance between the positions of body parts in space or between joint angles may be sufficient to measure the similarity. But for dance, this might not capture the various ways in which we perceive movements to be similar or to share similar traits, I guess. So as an example, if one person raises their right arm, another person raises their left arm, we might think that these movements are very similar and we would want to classify them as similar. But if we're then looking just at the Euclidean distance between different arm joints of the different people, then their movements would be very dissimilar. Another interesting or important distinction in expressive movements like dance is the concept of similarity as it relates to the content of the movement versus similarity in the quality of the movement. So what a person is doing versus how they are doing it. Now, I was lucky enough to work with Jorge when he visited RITMO last summer. And during his stay, we spent some time trying to formalize ways to measure these aspects when looking at people dancing the Macarena with varying degrees of enthusiasm. So we were looking at sort of how the qualities changed as their enthusiasm changed, I guess. So our participants, I should say, at that time were mostly non-dancers. So for some, it was quite hard to have any enthusiasm at all when asked to put on a mocap suit and dance the Macarena for us. But it was a very enlightening study for me to really get to think more deeply about what it means to share similar movement qualities when they're performing the same steps. So the final thing I wanted to mention, which is also a big part of what I'm interested in and want to do with my data set and my model, is to look at these sound movement couplings. So it was relatively clear that the dancers improvised using slightly different movement vocabularies, if I can say that, depending on what kind of music they were moving to. And this is something that I want to see if I can train my AI model to do as well. So in order to sort of better understand this, it would be helpful to perform some movement analysis to compare features of quality, for example, by looking at Laban effort, or as was mentioned by Nayara in her presentation yesterday, looking at some of Gould's definitions for music-related movement. So I'm currently trying to learn more about these different types of movement analysis, particularly how to quantify and measure these often quite like high level features of movement. And I'm also interested in examining these aspects, both of the data set, so the recordings of the dancers, but also in the generated examples too, to see whether or not the AI model can actually capture these multimodal concepts and learn to generate movements which I guess make sense for a certain musical input, whatever that may mean. So right now I'm trying to train the model to take only music data as input and learn to map from audio features to movement features. And there are actually a few works out there already which do this as well, or sort of experimenting with it. But what I find is that it's often focused on beat matching. So making sure that the generated movement follows sort of the beat of the music. And while this is of course a big part of dance and definitely interesting, I also think it's worthwhile to look at movement features that aren't directly related to when a movement happens in time, but how it happens in time as well. So unfortunately, I don't have any results to show you on this front today, but I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts on this. So I guess I could say that working with movement data has, and particularly dance, has definitely been challenging for me so far. But I do love every second of it. And the world of generative AI can be weird and funny and strange. But I also find it interesting that even though the model produces very strange things as it tries to learn to dance, I still find myself imbuing these movements with some sort of meaning or intent. And I'm very interested in hearing what you guys think about this and what you think the model is really learning. And of course, any other inputs that you may have. I'm really thankful for this opportunity to talk to a bunch of people who know so much more about this than I do, and to hear what you guys think of where I should go with this and yeah, anything. So yeah, thanks to Francisco and Jorge so much. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you so much, Benedict. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna ask you please to stop sharing the content, Benny, so that we can go to the gallery view. Like everybody can activate the gallery view so that we can see each other. If you feel comfortable, it will be very nice if you could turn your camera on, because we're gonna start with the Q&A section related to Benedict's presentation. So thank you so much, Benedict, for that. For our participants, I want to say that we have these two channels. There's someone else about to join right now. There we go. We have these two channels to submit your questions. You can either raise your hand or you can either write it down. I think we have the first question already. Please, Juan, thank you for your question. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for a really cool presentation. Probably the project you're working on is groundbreaking in many senses, because it's really crazy, and craziness is good. So I have some questions, for example, regarding the choice of method. So you chose, for example, to work with improvisation. And when it comes to humans, it takes a lot of effort to learn to improvise, right? So, for example, if someone told me, you know, you're going to learn from these 10 improvisers and I've never danced before, and then I suddenly have to, oh my God, what are they doing? So, I don't know, a curiosity would be, for example, you have popular music or traditional music genres such as salsa, right? So in salsa, you have some very basic patterns that you have to do, like, I don't know, the 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. But you still have a lot of room to improvise based on this, right? So, and you, both in terms of style, of quality of movement, syncopation, relation to the music. So I am curious a little bit, why did you, would you consider going that way? Perhaps there was some reason motivating you not to have gone that way in the first place. And I would also like to say, and perhaps hear a comment about this, because I think that this kind of thing forces us humans as well to formalize our knowledge about dance. You know, in the end, if you did the salsa thing, how would we say that the robot is a good salsa dancer or not? So that really requires working with a community with a specific community of salsa dancers and seeing, so how do you know when you're doing well or not? What, you know, so it forces us to clarify. And you mentioned this thing of analysis and synthesis as one of the motivations, and this would force us to analyze and synthesize the knowledge that we currently possess and to find ways of systematizing, which is basically the struggle of ethnochoreology. So I think in that sense your work is a great contribution. So yeah, please, I don't know, what are your views?
Thank you so much. Yeah, those are all interesting points, and I guess I can start with just why improvisation was chosen. There are a couple of works that I had seen and been interested in, which did work on sort of on different dances that are, I guess, more already sort of structured. They are more rule-based in a sense that you can sort of, there are a series of steps, and as you say, of course, you can improvise a lot within that rule set. But in a way, I was interested in looking at something which didn't have the strict rules or any as clear definitions, and I think that also that comes from the fact that this work is sort of born out of this sort of the RITMO Centre as well, where we have Rolfinge Goday and a bunch of people who look at sort of sound music mappings and how we can do these, how we can understand how certain sound features affect the way we move. And some studies had been done here on something called sound tracing, where you would have like a wand or like a stick with some motion capture little reflective balls on it, and then people were asked to listen to a sound which was basically quite simple sounds like I hope this isn't too loud, but like and these kinds of things. And then they were asked to trace this sound in the air to see if there was anything related to that. And they would make it less or more noisy, high pitch versus low pitch, and see how people sort of traced out these sounds with their bodies. And so in a way, my work sort of acts as an extension to that. I did try and do some machine learning with these sound tracing studies and got some interesting results from that. And so taking that sort of a step further and allowing people to use their whole body to just move as freely as they could to these musical stimuli was I guess what drew me to it. This now I think I've kind of lost your second question a little bit.
No, that's fine. It was like a comment about the relation between formalizing human knowledge in order to feed knowledge to the AI model. Exactly.
And I think that's, as I also mentioned, that involving people who have strong feelings about what they see when they see this, they see movement, and they can sort of try to formalize what they're seeing. I think that's a super interesting point of departure for research like this, just sort of trying to understand also in an even wider context, like why do we enjoy some movements and find them interesting, and other things the model does we might not find as interesting, and why are these things sort of pulling us in these directions, I think also would be really cool to see if we can start pointing or like prodding at least. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Great. We're gonna go now with the second question, which is coming from Richard. Thank you for connecting.
Hi, Benedikte. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. My questions kind of piggyback on what Juan Felipe asked. I was quite interested to know if the subsets you fed into the AI, were they based on, did you use the same music to generate the subsets, or was it just fed into, if there was just, the raw material was just fed in, or was it very music specific to what you had given to the dancers to improv?
Yeah, that's a good thing for me to get to clarify. Thank you. There were very lazy reasons for why I chose the subset of dancers that I did. If any of you have worked with motion capture data, I know Jorge struggled with this together with me. We were both learning this about a year ago. Cleaning up motion capture data is not fun, and it's slow. So there were a couple of recordings that were specifically 3 dancers that were firstly very good at keeping themselves within this like smaller area without like reaching too high or balling themselves up or doing anything like that. So their recordings were just easier to process.
Right.
So that was the main motivation. And then as soon as I just had some data, I immediately was like, can we just push this into the AI immediately and see what comes out? So it's just like a curiosity. Yeah. But I did use,
it didn't matter the music.
Yeah, so I did use, so there were 6 different songs that I played, and I included 3 dancers in this training data for the stuff that you've seen today.
Okay.
And I included an equal amount of examples from each of the songs. So each song is equally represented, which is also an interesting thing, because then what the model is doing is really generalizing across songs that, at least my theory is that they inspire quite different types of movement. And so the model is just seeing all of it at the same time, and has to sort of...
That's where my thought was, because you were talking about early in the presentation about possibly using your research to predict more movement. So I was just wondering, from as a choreographer, if I were to use the program, I would expect the AI to understand the way I move in order to generate what I need for what I'm doing. And then your comments about quality and using the quality of the music to create the quality of movement also plays into that. So I also found that quite interesting, and wondering, you know, how, I mean, as a predictive tool, exactly how are you going to train the AI as you teach it to dance to be predictive, which is something else entirely. Because I mean, and as Juan Felipe said, improv is an art. It's an art to be learned as well. Because I know dancers, professional dancers, who hate to improv. I am one. You know, I can do it, but I hate doing it. But I can. So I found that interesting. And then why I asked about the subsets, that it's interesting as well to see what the AI picks up from what it sees, and what it thinks is interesting, as opposed to what expert thinks are interesting. Because of course, it's making those decisions as well to create its movement, what it thinks is interesting or pertinent to what it's learning, you know, and how do we then pick that up and use that. But this is very interesting for me.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that you find it interesting also, because I mean, this idea of having it tuned to a certain person and having it be trained on, for example, you would come into my lab and I would record a couple of hours of you dancing, whatever you wanted, and I'd feed that into the model, and then it would be a model which is purely meant to predict what it thinks you would do. And that's sort of the double-edged sword of AI, because AI is per definition meant to generalize. That is what AI does. It takes a lot of data and it generalizes. Like, what can I learn from all these examples? What is the things I can pick out that are the same for everyone? And this is why we also have a lot of trouble with AI, because you can it becomes extremely dependent on what the data is. That's why you can get AI that when this job is done poorly and not very well thought through, you can get pretty ugly situations. There's a ton of examples. I don't know how much I should go into this now, but it's horrific.
I want to ask you, Benny, since we have another presentation after this, and for the sake of time, and you still have, 4 more questions, I would like to ask you and also our participants to try to summarize as much as possible so that everybody gets the chance to ask their questions. As you can see, everybody's very interested in what you said, so I just want to make sure that everybody has enough time. So please, now we're going to go with Beatriz. Thank you for coming with us, and you can go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering also about not only improvisation, because I worked with contact improvisation, and there was this issue with the practitioners of this particular genre to come to a consensus on what the rules are for dancing contact. So, and then when I think of AI, I'm thinking that you need clear rules in order to predict and to understand what are the true values. So I was wondering on how do we understand what's the rule in a dance, and how each genre is gonna bring its own notion of what rules are. And yeah, so I was really wondering on how do you take these assumptions, and also wondering about the assumption of freedom, assumptions of music motivated movement, right? Because also we sometimes maybe we over rely on the notion that, okay, this is all, I'm moving like this only because of rhythm, but not because of, I don't know, some other body sensations. So I was wondering how you relate to this.
Yeah, I think those are good points. Just to start at the beginning, I guess when you're absolutely right in that this is a difficult thing with having the finding the true values, because as I said, in this model right now, all I'm doing is like look at a sequence of frames, like video frames, and then the correct answer is what happens in the next frame. So that means if one dancer does this, and this is the last frame, and from there they go down, and then we have an example which is almost exactly the same, but they go up, then these two kind of cancel each other out. And the model sort of has to learn to do something in between. Like it's the way we classically do this kind of machine learning isn't set up for doing creative tasks like dance, where there are multiple answers that can be interesting, multiple answers that could be correct. And we'd be hard pressed to say, no, it was the correct thing to go down. No, it's not more correct than going up. It's just that that's what this current example did. So it's a big question. It's something that I intend to keep looking at and see if there's something I can do about that, and sort of reaching out to the machine learning community to see what they think about these sort of problems and how we should best approach them. Because it's absolutely possible that the way we're doing it now, with just saying, this is the correct answer, don't think about it anymore, that isn't the best way. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Thank you both. And now we're gonna go with a question by Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and thank you very much, Benedikt, for your wonderful presentation. So when hearing you, it came to my mind a book which is called Rhythmical Subjects from D. Reynolds. And why I'm mentioning this is because your presentation is impossible that doesn't raise this kind of ethical as well as moral dimensions, you know? So we know that at some point of human history, we teach, or we not teach, but we made a big effort that machines could repeat or resemble human movements. And industrialization came, but at some point, what I want to say here is that at some point, we start moving like machines. Okay, so in this book, for instance, she's talking about Merce Cunningham. I think that she's also talking about Mary Wigman and Martha Graham. And she says how this kind of mechanical movements, industrialized movement, these dancers started to contest the way we start moving at some point of history. So I don't know if this is a question or not, but how you deal, yeah, it is a question, how you deal with the moral and ethical dimension of do you think that if this get massive, we will start dancing as robots at some point, something that action on economies? So thank you very much, Benedikt, and it was a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you, and thanks for a very interesting question. I think it's absolutely a fascinating thing to spend some time thinking about. In a way, what I love about machine learning is that it is contrary to the name. It is very non-intelligent. Computers are extremely stupid. They can do so little, but they can do small things well and faster often than we can, but they're still extremely stupid, and they don't have eras of cultural and social things happening affecting how they move. The only thing it's doing is looking at these examples and trying to pull out something that resembles them. So it really is the machines learning from us and not the other way around. The hope is that it would be interesting enough for someone to want to see these movements. And I think I did catch some of you during the presentation as we were looking at the videos, sort of getting into or sort of mimicking what the model was doing, which I think is very cool to see. And that just gives me a sort of a good feeling that there is sort of a mutual curiosity, because this model is trying to learn what we do, and then you guys have a natural sort of pull towards feeling with your bodies what the model is doing. So I think this can also, doesn't have to be a negative or a scary thing. It can be an interesting symbiosis, but it's definitely something we should be conscious of, and I think it's a very interesting point. Yeah, so thank you so much for that question.
Fantastic. We're gonna go with the last two questions before we go with Maria Jose's presentation. So please, Nina Davis, welcome, and go ahead with your question.
Hello, thank you so much for that talk. It was really interesting. So I've just got a question. It might be like a simple yes or no answer, but I was thinking about how sort of we understand rhythms in sort of a binary sense, and like that's how we learn about rhythm with the heartbeat, sort of sending blood in and out, and we have our two legs with the two steps. I was wondering whether sort of like what this AI gaze to rhythm is, and whether it's also binary, or whether it's like, whether it might be, I was thinking about binary code, but I know nothing about binary code, but I was just thinking about whether whether the sort of coding language that it exists in sort of odd or even numbers, or whether it's numbers at all.
Yeah, Yeah, that's very interesting. And yeah, it is numbers. It's real numbers. So it can fall anywhere between, because it's just the X, Y, Z position of each of these markers in space. That's all it sees. So it just sees a block of numbers that when I translate them into the these points and lines, you see the human form. So again, it's you're giving the AI way too much credit. It is way dumber than that. It really is, it is just dealing with these numbers. And it's we on the other side, when we see this translated back into something we recognize as a human form, that we sort of have these associations. And my model in particular, other models focus more on rhythm and maybe have some sort of way of representing this sort of on-off beat. But for my model, it really is just a series, like an ever-changing matrix of real numbers of like shifting. And then when it comes out the other side, and I, as a human, as a creative myself, when I put music to it, we feel like there is some relationship happening there, when in reality, there really isn't. As for now, at least, but yeah.
Thank you both. Now we're gonna go with the last question. Thank you so much, Tristan, for joining us. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hey.
First, I just want to say I found your talk very fascinating. I have no background in AI, but I recently just so happened to read an article on neuroscience of dance, and you kind of answered this a little bit in response to one of the other questions about how you noticed during your talk you saw us kind of moving along with the AI component as well. And I thought also too, the gentleman who said it's interesting to see like what the robot notates as important and when it comes to movement and things like that. And so I was curious, a lot of dance is learned like unintentionally through like watching people. And so I was curious to see if your research also looks at like taking mirror neurons. Like I know you mentioned like short-term memory and things like that, but taking like the component of just mimicking, I guess, in a way, and that might help in the predictability of movement and I guess the robot learning a little bit faster. And so I was just curious if that avenue has been looked at. And like I said, I have no background in AI, so maybe that's not a feasible question, but yeah, just curious.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting point. I don't know of any research that has sort of gone that deep into the neuroscience of movement and sort of combined that with actually having something that generates movement. I don't know if that has happened. I would be very interested to see if anyone has done that. If not, I'm going to just call dibs on that right now and I'll try it out. I don't really know that much about neuroscience. Artificial neural nets are super simplified versions of our own brains, so they're not even close to as complex as we are, or any biological brain. But we definitely do steal concepts from biology. So it might have been something someone looked into. But I also wanted to say, just because it reminded me when you said that about this concept, I guess, of sort of giving and taking. And we also had a talk earlier about this having two dancers and how they affect each other. And we've also heard people talk about how musicians in the same room and how this, like all these sort of collaborations that can happen that way, which I think would also be interesting, both as a research question, but also just as a purely artistic exploration. What happens if we can get this sort of a feedback loop between the AI producing something and then a human producing something, and is it possible to get sort of like a call and response thing going, and what would that feel like for the person? Would they feel like they're actually getting something out of it or not? So I think it's very interesting and a good point. Thanks so much.
I mean, not that you needed it, but I can post the article if you're curious about it, just to see. I'll post it in the chat if you would like.
Great. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Benedikt, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so very much for such a great presentation. I think it was a wonderful contribution for this cycle, so I'm very grateful that you accepted. I don't know if you want to close with any message or any comment for the participants here.
I mean, I think, yeah, I just want to thank you guys again. It's been really great. Thanks for so many great questions. I'm glad you were, it didn't all sound like gibberish and craziness to you guys. It really means a lot that it isn't often that I get a room full of people who know so much about the domain that I'm working in. So it really is very valuable to me. So thank you again, Jorge, Francisco, everyone. Thanks so much.